Hello and welcome to Deeper, a podcast where we have honest conversations with fascinating people who have lived unique lives and the companion piece to our YouTube series Deep. We want to give you a deeper window into the experiences and worlds of our amazing guests. So if you enjoyed today's interview, please consider subscribing. There will be a new video every week. Hi, I'm Marianne and today I'm joined by Bjorn. Hi Bjorn, really nice to have you here.
Yeah, good to be here.
Just to start with, can you please tell us who you are and why you're here?
Well, I'm Bjorn Ihler. I'm a survivor of the 2011 terrorist attack in Norway, and since then I've been working in counter-terrorism and counter-extremism, trying to prevent other people from having to go through what I went through back then.
Can we just start maybe, where did you grow up? What was your childhood? What were you like as a kid?
So I grew up in the outskirts of Oslo in one of the most diverse neighborhoods in the city, and with a lot of people from all over the place coming together, and had a fairly kind of normal upbringing.
What were your friendship groups like? What were your interests, and essentially how you ended up on the island?
Growing up in kind of the most diverse neighborhood of town, I kind of very early on learned that people are being treated differently. Being a white Norwegian, I saw that my friends who had other origins were often discriminated against in different contexts, etc. And so because of that, kind of the sense of injustice of that, I got involved in politics. I started off doing kind of school politics, working within student councils, etc., and then joined later the Labour Party and the Labour Youth Party in Norway, which had a fairly kind of solid agenda on this at the time. Through that, started working on both educational policy, working on social policy of different sorts, and evolved within the Labour Youth Party for quite some time. And then realized that most people don't really care about politics. We can talk at length about statistics and about how society works. The thing that really changes how people feel about each other within a society isn't necessarily the facts, but how they feel. And so because of that, started to explore more using creative storytelling as a tool for shaping people's minds in different ways. Because of that, I decided to go in and study theatre production, and studied theatre production and technology for a couple of years in Liverpool, which is when the terrorist attack happened. So I went back to Norway on summer vacation and went out to the Labour Youth Party summer camp to connect with old friends who I hadn't seen for a year. It was after my first year at university.
How big was the gathering? Like, just to give us an idea of what it was like.
So I think it was somewhere between 500 and 800 people from all across Norway. So Norway is a country of about 5 million people. The Labour Youth Party has small regional clusters all over the country. And so this summer camp is really kind of the annual gathering place for the party. And so people from all over the country come in and meet there.
And to give this a little bit more of the context, I'm assuming that Labour Party is quite leftist party. So I guess the people who would gather there would be the people of quite leftist views and on politics, on the society.
So the Labour Party in Norway has kind of been the leading party of the country since pretty much the Second World War. In some ways, it's a fairly kind of centrist party within the Norwegian context, but the Norwegian context is fairly leftist compared to a lot of the rest of the world. And so, you can say it's a kind of leftist party from a global perspective, but a kind of reasonably centrist party from a Norwegian perspective.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the way it started is that the attack at the island was the second part of the attack. The first attack was in Oslo.
Yeah. So I came out to the island kind of the day before the terrorist attack, and the summer camp had already been going on for a couple of days. I had to work for some of it, and decided to skip work on the Friday, which was the 22nd of July when the terrorist attack happened. So I came out in the evening of the 21st. During the 22nd of July, we had our meetings, there were workshops, and there were guest speakers and things like that. While that was going on the island, a car bomb was planted near the government headquarters in downtown Oslo and blew up, and the government headquarters were pretty much shattered. I think about 8 people died in that bombing. Thankfully, it was during the height of summer vacation, and so not a lot of people were in their offices on a Friday afternoon, and so otherwise the bomb blast would have been more devastating than it already was. And so that was Breivik who had planted the bomb. We didn't know what had exploded, but we started getting text messages and things like that from friends and family in Oslo about the explosion. We started reading the news and trying to figure out what was going on. There were theories that this might be a gas explosion or something like that, because no one could really imagine even that there would be a terrorist attack in Norway. Like, it's completely unprecedented in so many ways. And so everyone were confused. I was with the delegation from Oslo. The party offices were reasonably close to the government headquarters. We had friends working in government, etc. And so we were trying to figure out like whether our friends were safe, and what was going on with like the party offices and things like that. And so we kind of gathered the Oslo delegation, and we were told that the safest place to be was on the island, and the best idea was to stay put rather than try to go into town, because like some of us wanted to leave and connect with family and so on. While we were kind of coordinating and trying to figure out what was going on back in Oslo, we started hearing like loud popping sounds, and like we were on this tiny little island, and so the first kind of assumption was someone's firing off fireworks or something like that, who haven't realized what's going on in Oslo. But then in the distance from where I was on the campsite, we saw a man in dark clothes, turns out later a fake police uniform, was walking across kind of there's like a little ridge, and he was walking across that, and some people ran towards him, and he lifted his gun and shot those people straight down. And I turned around and ran into the forest surrounding the campsite. So that was how we realized that something was going on the island as well. However, cognitively, it didn't really like make sense. Like, this was a summer camp in the Norwegian countryside. Like, terrorist attacks do not happen in that reality. And so like this was kind of the unimaginable, and trying to realize that the unimaginable was happening was a big kind of challenge in some sort of way, where even though I ran and I hid, I was still trying to rationalize what was happening. Like, was this some weird exercise? Was this like there was no like way this could really be happening, and so making sense of it in the moment was even a challenge. And but you know, it was really happening, and so yeah.
So Breivik was dressed in fake police uniform.
Yeah,
and that was his kind of disguise. Can we we'll continue on that a little bit, but can we just give a bit of a overview of who he was and kind of what was his twisted kind of idea of what he wanted to achieve?
So Breivik was still is kind of a far-right extremist, as we broadly classify it. He was very Islamophobic, and his main motivation was really wanting to stop immigration to Norway from the Muslim world. So like this is a fairly common ideology that we see across the European far-right. We see it with things like the English Defence League here in the UK, Pegida protests during the mid-2010s across most of Europe, the identitarian movement that has a lot of prominence, for instance, in Austria, the Rassemblement National and Front National political parties in France are kind of obsessed about this etc. And so, it's not a very unique thing. And we've also seen other terrorists conduct terrorist attacks kind of rooted in the same belief system later. So Breivik served as an inspiration for a lot of subsequent attacks, including the terrible attack in Christchurch in New Zealand in 2019, and a number of others as well.
It's an interesting event to target in the sense that it's just young people as well, mostly, right?
Yeah, the targeting of the event was probably motivated by, in part, shock value, which, attacking young people at the summer camp is going to draw a lot of attention. And we see that being a strategy from terrorists across ideological spectrum, that they attack kind of high visibility scenarios. We've seen that with things like the Manchester Arena attack here in the UK. We've seen it with attacks in Paris and Belgium, etc. That both far-right extremists as well as Islamist-inspired extremists are attacking large gatherings, particularly of young people, and that is a conscious strategy to also draw a lot of attention to the attack and the motivation behind the attack. The perception among the Norwegian far right in particular was that the Labour Party was very liberal on immigration, which, from the perspective of someone who is liberal on immigration, isn't necessarily the case. I view the Norwegian Labour Party as reasonably conservative when it comes to immigration, but still they viewed the government and the party as opening the doors to immigration in a way that was harmful to some weird fantasy about Norway as kind of a white Christian ethno-state almost. And so that was kind of the political side of the targeting as well. So there was this combination of a political motivation as well as of wanting to draw attention, part of the motivation.
So coming back to the 22nd of July, so can you tell us what happened after? So basically, as you said, you saw Breivik there. He shot the people in front of you, which is, it's extremely traumatizing. You're kind of trying to make sense of it, but also trying to save your life.
Yeah.
So what were your next actions?
So I ran into the woods that were surrounding the camp area. I called my father in the hopes that he might have some idea about the reality of this. And his advice was to stay hidden, which, good advice. The island is very small. It takes 10 minutes to walk around the kind of circumference of it. And on that track was a lot of people who were confused about what was happening, kind of standing up and talking loudly. So me and a friend started kind of telling people to be quiet and stay hidden, try to cover up very visible clothing. The color of the party is red, and so a lot of people were wearing red t-shirts. And on that track, I also found an 8-year-old boy sitting. His father was among the security personnel on the island, and later turns out was among the first people to get shot on the island. I took this 8-year-old boy and we found a hiding spot not so far away from the track, and we kind of lay down on the ground there and stayed hidden while consistently hearing gunshots around us. There was a lot of echo, and so it's difficult to kind of place where the shots were coming from. And we stayed there for almost an hour, I believe, while this was happening. And after a while, the shots came closer to where we were, and a group of people came running through just the bush where we were hiding. And so we joined that group, believing that they were running from Breivik. And in that group was another kid. I was a friend of the kid I was hiding with. So I ran with the two kids along the track around the island, and we ended up running into a place where we couldn't follow the track anymore because there was so many dead bodies on it. Somehow we ended up on the southern tip of the island, where there's like some rocks going out into the water. And we saw that people were swimming. The kids couldn't swim that well, so I decided to not do that. We saw that there was a helicopter in the air. We believe that was a police helicopter. Later turned out to be the National Broadcasting Company filming us. We saw boats in the water, so we tried to get the attention of the helicopter and of the boats to get help. And then I lent my phone to the kids so they could call their mothers, telling them that they shouldn't call their fathers in case they were hiding on the island, but also knowing that their fathers would probably not pick up. And they did, and I called my father and told him that, like, so far I was still alive, and at that point we hadn't heard shots for a little while. And while I was on the phone with him, this man in a police uniform came out of the forest behind us and told us they caught the bad guy. I relayed that to my father while the guy in the police uniform lifted his gun and started shooting at our group. And turns out that was Breivik. And I jumped in the water. So the last thing my father heard was that we're safe, the police is here. And my phone died. And the kids and I swam kind of straight out for a little bit. It's very shallow, so swimming, crawling on the ground with people getting shot around us. And I was wearing a big woolen jumper at the time, and kind of sank and then stood back up in the water and pulled that off. And after doing that, I looked back towards land and saw Breivik take aim at me, and realized that this is the end. And that was a very surreal moment. Breivik fired, he missed, terrible shot, thankfully. I ended up falling over in the water and making my way kind of around a little edge and hiding under some bushes that were hanging out over the water. The two young boys joined me, and we stayed in the water while Breivik walked back up onto the island where he was arrested by the actual police. And so, we then stayed in the water for quite a bit until the kids basically turned blue. And we hadn't heard shots for quite some time again, and climbed back up onto some rocks. After a while, the actual police came. They had a bit of a hard time getting us to trust that they were the actual police. Like, we were kind of exhausted at that point, and ended up eventually getting a boat back over to the mainland from the island. So, yeah. I don't think I'll be able to forget it ever. After the attack, it took a long time to kind of get back to kind of some degree of normalcy. Years even of dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. Part of that was also kind of understanding the concrete details of what had happened. And so familiarizing myself with that story was part of how I dealt with kind of the facts of what had happened to me. Also trying to understand how we ended up there, how Breivik became Breivik, became really a part of my healing process. Attended as many court days as possible. I read the manifesto. I ended up studying extremism, and at this point have dedicated the last however many years, 11 or so years, to kind of fighting terrorism and extremism based largely on this experience. It became a driving force in doing all of that, but also like the initial stages of that was very much try to piece together the puzzle of what had happened and learn for myself how to deal with it.
It's incredible. It's incredible that it's part of the healing process, is kind of part of dealing with PTSD is getting deeper in the event and kind of rationalizing it, I guess, but trying to understand it, to the cause and roots and everything of it.
Yeah, I think rationalizing it is one component of it that like works for me. Like everyone's experiences with PTSD are different, and like there's so many different ways of dealing with it. For me, that was kind of a path that worked. For others, there's been other paths. But like one component of that was also professionalizing it. And so starting to very early on, like even in late 2011, early 2012, working with it from kind of a more documentary perspective, working with documentary filmmakers, working with journalism, etc., to kind of explain what had happened also to other people became an important part of it. And that allowed me to think about it as like, this is a job component of my life, which, is a way of like distancing while also processing. And so that's kind of one component of how those early days of dealing with this were.
Leaving after the attack, you said that one of the things you really wanted to try to understand is how and why Breivik became Breivik. So did you get close to that?
I don't think it's possible to ever understand fully how someone ends up becoming like Breivik, and Breivik is not particularly collaborative in that either. He's still very much a far-right extremist. He's still very much imprisoned for that. It's hard to kind of finalize any conclusions there, but also like learning that was a process. What I did was start working with people who had been similar to Breivik in some sort of way, people who had been radicalized into extremist movements. And so I started traveling the world and meeting with former extremists, people who had been in these movements and who had left, trying to learn what their journeys into the movements had been was kind of my primary goal, because I wanted to understand the process of radicalization and kind of the rationalization of that kind of hatred. And then while I was doing that, I started realizing that, hey, all of these people have left these movements as well, and started working more on understanding what the trajectories back out of the movements were. And so through that, learned a lot about the process of radicalization and potential places for intervention against that, but also started learning about processes of healing and rehabilitation and how people also were able to come back out of these movements. In that, found kind of a hope in humanity, in sort of right. I always had faith in humanity, but there's kind of power in that people are able to change and people are able to come back out of fairly extreme ideologies in some sort of way and build reasonably normal lives after that. And so learning about that, also started working with various institutions to operationalize that in creating both prevention programs, helping people not join extremist movements in the first place, and then also help develop and design rehabilitation programs and get people who were radicalized to leave those movements in different ways.
I want to ask you several questions about radicalization. I guess the first one is, why do some people get radicalized and others don't? Is there like something that needs to be in you, needs to happen? Are there any qualities that you need to have or not have?
So what we've found is that people who are getting radicalized are enormously diverse. There's no single like indicator or path that this person is going to be radicalized. And in most cases, when we look at the factors that are common to people who are being radicalized, those factors are also enormously common to a lot of people who are not being radicalized. It teaches us that it's important not to do profiling, which is kind of the direction things like that quickly go in. But at the same time, it also teaches us that there are some factors that we all need as humans. And one of the things that happens to people who are radicalized is that those needs are being met by extremist groups. And so one of the strongest drivers there is the importance of a sense of belonging and a sense of value within some sort of community, which is something that is being exploited by people who are grooming people into joining extremist movements, where they latch onto the people that they want to radicalize and cut them off from kind of pre-existing friend groups or even their families, and kind of replace that with an extremist group, with an extremist ideology, and then ties together the sense of value and the sense of belonging and the sense of identity of an individual with the extremist ideology. And we see this kind of pattern of kind of active radicalization across Islamist extremist groups, as well as far-right extremist groups and other extremist ideological groups around the world.
In a lot of places in Europe, but even in the world, like Australia, for example, the far-right or kind of, okay, maybe not far-right, but right-wing parties, let's put it that way, come to power. And that kind of feels like a trajectory where a lot of kind of countries and a lot of places in the world going into. Why is that? Why do you think that happens?
One of the things I often say is that extremism exists in kind of the balance between fear and supremacy, where like extremists believe that they are more valuable than the rest of humanity in some sort of way, that they've found the correct path. And at the same time, they are enormously afraid of everyone else. It kind of boils down to my working in operational definition of violent extremism as the violent denial of diversity, where extremist groups are afraid of everyone who is divergent from what they view as legitimate. And so in this balance between supremacy, which makes people feel good about themselves, and fear, which makes people feel afraid of everyone who isn't within kind of the in-group, there is opportunity for capitalization by political parties, etc., who want to drive that in order to win elections. However, I think it's also important to distinguish between what exists within the legitimate political spectrum of political discourse and parties. Like we should have within functional democracies the right to vote however we like. And so it's important to kind of distinguish between like the politically normative, so people using democratic processes for winning elections, versus the non-normative, which is when it steps out of democratic processes and into the realm of physical violence, where the more radicalized and extreme movements exist, which is really kind of what we're trying to counter in countering violent extremism.
I also wonder why, kind of one of the main narratives, and with Breivik the same, why is always immigration, which is kind of the main thing which they always address, and the main thing that they kind of blame most of the societal problems onto? So
the problem, kind of as assigned by extremist groups, tends to vary, and immigration is right now a big component of it. But we've also seen kind of other kind of targets of the extremism pop up. So like there's a lot of overlap between extreme chauvinism and violent extremism, where like women's rights are being targeted, where LGBTQI rights are being targeted. We saw during COVID that like, vaccination was being targeted. And so the extremist movements are reasonably adaptable in some sort of way, where they kind of adopt issues that are reasonably easy to target. And immigration is an issue that is controversial and easy to kind of build engagement around. So I think it's more about kind of easy targeting. At the same time, we're seeing kind of longer historic conspiracy theories, etc., go into how some of these narratives are being built, and so there's kind of strong anti-Semitic rooting for a lot of the extremism we're seeing, where like even a lot of the migration we've seen in Europe from the Middle East and North Africa over the last couple of decades are by some of these extremist communities being viewed as part of kind of a Jewish world order, trying to replace the European population with a Muslim population in order to escalate conflict. At the root of a lot of that is kind of this deeply rooted anti-Semitism, as well as that being kind of used to justify Islamophobia. And so there's kind of really complex conspiracy theories at the root of some of this. There's kind of the idea of like world orders of like shadowy hidden government, etc., that are recurring themes within different extremist movements. And so that's not unique to just kind of one group, but something we're seeing across multiple parts of the spectrum again. And so, they kind of latch on to easy targets is an easy explanation for it.
How can you break the cycle of this kind of, I don't know, hatred, violence? What is it?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things that we've seen with people who are being radicalized into these movements. First of all, kind of a saying that I have been repeating since about 2013 or 14 when I first met with a former member of the Hammerskins Nation, which is like the largest neo-Nazi movement in the world. He put it very succinctly in saying, hurt people. Like, people who are in pain will cause pain for others. And the easiest way of breaking that cycle is by dealing with your pain in healthier ways than by causing pain for others. And so helping people deal with trauma, deal with the pain and suffering in their own lives in ways that aren't damaging to themselves and other people is really at the heart of a lot of how we are breaking the cycles. So mental health support and different ways of supporting people in dealing with their own issues is really kind of a good starting point. There's also kind of the understanding of like, trying to get people on board with the idea that like we don't make the world better by being vengeful. Understanding like different strategies for dealing with kind of justifiable, often grievances, and understanding that there are healthier ways of dealing with that than by repeating these cycles of escalating violence. And so it's really up to individuals to heal and deal with their own issues in healthy ways, but also for us as communities to collectively decide that we want to deal with humanity in these healthier ways in order to not escalate violence and create a forever more violent society.
That goes into a very interesting topic which I want to cover, and it kind of brings us back to Breivik, because obviously one of the big things about him to this day is the fact that he's in the Norwegian prison system, which is famously, I don't have to explain it to you, the Scandinavian prison system, which is considered by a lot of countries as very, I would say, light in its approach. And I think he's been giving the biggest sentence in the Norwegian prison system is 21 or 22 years.
Yep.
So he's received 22 years.
Breivik was sentenced to 21 years, but then with the option of extending it in kind of 4-year cycles if he's still seen as a threat to society after those 21 years. The reasoning behind the way in which the Norwegian prison system works is rehabilitative. So like there is one punitive component to imprisoning people, but also a goal of imprisonment is to rehabilitate them and help them find ways to re-enter society as productive citizens. There's no sign as of right now that Breivik will ever be rehabilitated. He's very strongly repeated his ideological bearings and general hatred, etc. And so like the risk of recidivism is definitely still there. And so it's unlikely that he will get out after the 21 years. And I would say unlikely that he will ever get back out. But the Norwegian prison system is still designed towards rehabilitation, and that is the goal of imprisonment to a large extent in Norway. And one of the things I felt very strongly after the attack was that we shouldn't give this individual, Breivik, the power to change how our system works or how we kind of as a community and as a culture view humanity, because we should view humanity as recoverable in some sort of way. We should view it as possible for people to rehabilitate. That seems like the healthier way of dealing with crime in many ways. And that also shows up in things like crime statistics, where recidivism in Norway, people recommitting crimes after having served in prison, is enormously low compared to in a lot of other countries. Like, the system works for its purpose if the purpose is to prevent crime, but it also works for rebuilding people's ability to function as non-criminal people. And so maintaining that, while also acknowledging that within the system there is the capability for dealing with people like Breivik, because he can be imprisoned de facto for life if he still poses a threat to society. Like, acknowledging that spectrum is covered by what we already have, rather than starting to develop new kind of snap legislation in direct response to a horrific act of terror, is one way of demonstrating the resilience of a society in dealing with what's happening as well. And to me, that was important.
I just don't think everyone would have had that attitude, and I don't think a lot of people, and I don't think a lot of countries would have that on a, as you said, like legislational kind of level. I wonder whenever it's coming from, like what's in the society this is different.
Yeah, it's a very tricky question. Like, cultures, countries, individuals deal with all of this very differently, and like there's a lot of different ways of reacting to something like that happening that are very understandable. Like, I understand the parents who wanted to reinstate the death penalty to deal with Breivik. I understand from like a rational level, like why that was an expressed wish. I understand other countries who are dealing with their terrorists. I know for myself that wouldn't have been satisfactory. Like, us killing Breivik would just have made there be one more dead person in like the already too high number of like 77 people killed. And so, and at the end of the day, that doesn't help anyone. Keeping him alive, having a due process, having a long trial, etc., like really also was helpful in my initial stages of dealing with what had happened and understanding what had happened. And so like that was one important component of that. Norway as a culture, being a fairly open society, a society with a high degree of trust between individuals, etc., is something that I cherish as a Norwegian. And I understand that like not all countries function that way. But we are a country of 5 million people. We are mostly kind of small villages spread across the entire country. Like if someone commits a crime, it's likely that it's someone you know somehow. In this attack, for instance, like I think basically everyone in Norway knows someone who was there. That's just the nature of a very small society, but also a society where people have had to depend on each other in small communities, both to kind of survive the harsh nature of Norway, not an easy place to live, just from a climatic perspective, but also like a society in which like those close kind of bonds and relationships have led to us dealing with conflict internally. And I'm not sure it can be kind of replicated anywhere or anything like that. And I'm not here to like necessarily say that like this is the correct way of dealing with things, but it's one option, and it's an option that's worked reasonably well for Norway, with the perspective that like we want to have high degrees of trust. We want to have low recidivism. We want to have kind of some of these like social goods that work for us.
So we're in UK, and UK has, I think, biggest amount of prisoners in Europe.
Yep.
Why can't UK? I mean, it's probably a very complicated question, and you probably can't answer it completely, but I just want to somehow try to understand why UK can't have an approach like that. Why UK prison system cannot be rehabilitation based.
Like the UK is culturally very different from Norway. Like I've lived both in the UK and in Norway. Now I live in Sweden. Like the UK has a much kind of longer history of like class differences and things like that. Like Norway is a very egalitarian society. The UK is not. The UK has always had a more punitive approach to crime. Norway used to be closely modeled on the UK system in terms of like how prisons, etc. worked. And so there's possibilities in reshaping that. But part of it is like Norway is a country of like, again, 5 million people or so. The UK has much larger population on a much smaller island. And so there's going to be natural differences in how you deal with the population density even just generally, and how that leads to differences in approaches in prison systems as well. But I think the deepest rooted difference is probably in how Norway is a very like equalized and egalitarian society and has been so forever, while the UK has a much longer and more kind of complicated history with that.
After everything you kind of experienced, after everything you experienced with your work, do you believe people can change?
I do believe people can change, and I've seen people change. I've seen people change and then change back to being bad in different ways. Like people are complicated, and in most scenarios you get like a snapshot of where people are at that day. But people evolve, people learn, people change. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. But at the end of the day, I fundamentally like know for myself that people can change. And then the question is how we utilize that in order to help people change for the better, both for themselves and for society at large.
Looking back at the attack and kind of the PTSD which you had after it, how do you feel now? Do you think you've recovered from it in certain ways?
So I don't know if you ever truly recover from PTSD. You learn to live with it in different ways. For me, it's kind of been like the professionalization of it in some other way, where like I still deal with like terrorism and violent extremism on a day-to-day basis. Now we are like mapping extremist networks and trying to understand how they operate and where to most strategically intervene, and helping like various clients with that. And for me, that's like still an abstraction to some extent of what's happened to me, and also a way of kind of pushing back and helping make sure people don't have to go through like that degree of trauma. And sometimes we succeed in stopping terrorist attacks, which is the best feeling in the world in some sort of way. I still have a very active relationship with it, but I don't have kind of the severe symptoms of PTSD that I had initially, of like enormous fear, like sleep deprivation, like all of these things that have come as very natural reactions to going through something like that. And so like it's a healing process, and I assume I will be kind of on the journey of healing for the rest of my life. But at this point, I'm able to kind of live a very normal life in many ways, without the trauma symptoms being ever present. Like right now, I run a nonprofit called the Khalifa Ihler Institute and a company called Revanturet. The Khalifa Ihler Institute is designed to build peaceful and thriving communities. And so in that, we do a lot of the rehabilitation work, working with communities on recovering from trauma, but also the preventative work in trying to build resilience against people being radicalized in the first place. through my company, we are supporting things like social media networks, but also supporting like shipping and logistics companies, etc., in understanding the operational threats of terrorism to them, and also how to intervene in that, even if like crime hasn't necessarily occurred, in order to try to prevent things from happening as early as possible. The cost of terrorism in terms of lives, but also the financial cost of terrorism increases drastically as it gets closer to an actual attack. And at the point of an actual attack, it's really important to us to try to detect as early as possible when things are going wrong, so that we can put in place measures to keep people safe, and also so that we can make sure that the people who are engaged in these movements, get out of it as smoothly as possible. And sometimes that includes working with law enforcement in order to intervene and prevent violence from happening, but also a lot of the time it involves using other tools at our disposal, outreach, communication campaigns, etc., to try to prevent people from going down these paths.
Do you work with online radicalization?
Yeah, so online is a component of radicalization. There's been a lot of kind of discourse over the last 15 or so years about like the role of social media in radicalization, and we work a lot with social media. We also understand social media as a component of people's daily lives rather than like a separate sphere. It's been trying to kind of reconstruct the fact that like social media is a fact of life these days, and so there's factors online as well as factors online that are components of why people are radicalized by things they are seeing online, but also that has offline impact on their lives. And so you can't view the two spheres as separate. One of the places where we detect the earliest signals often of people being radicalized is online, because people are very communicative often about their beliefs and about their radicalization online. And so it's a place where we are able to find some of the early warning signs and help the intervention providers in various areas where people are being radicalized, deal with those people in healthy ways.
What are the main social media platforms that are used for radicalization?
It really depends on the community which platforms are the most used. We are seeing increasingly that kind of more distributed platforms are being used. So Telegram is kind of our go-to. We've also seen kind of Discord be a factor. Like more direct messaging platforms are often used, where larger group chats often are where we are detecting. But also we've seen like the use of mainstream platforms like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, etc., for spreading propaganda. And so like the way in which I often work is like we're looking for people who are trying to recruit, people who are trying to promote ideology. Again, often very public communication, but also we're looking for people coordinating and planning and doing kind of some of the specific elements for performing attacks. And so like across that spectrum, there's a lot of activity, and there's different platforms that cater to different kind of needs from the extremist groups' perspective for that. Radicalization is about kind of finding a community and a sense of belonging. And so more community-oriented platforms are better for that, while they are not necessarily the best for kind of recruitment to those communities. And so we often see that process starts with people on like X or Facebook or Instagram, some of the bigger kind of more broadcast-oriented platforms, and from that draw people into more closed group chats, and that is a danger sign in some ways of like if you're going from a very public discourse to more and more closed-off discourse, there might be an issue there in terms of like you might be drawn further and further into a dangerous community.
To finish it off, I want to ask you, what would be the signs? Like, for example, if someone is worried about their, kid or their friend or someone being radicalized. I mean, I guess specifically I'm asking about online because I'm assuming that this is maybe one of the main ones, but also I feel like that's the one that people are commonly more worried about? What advice would you give them? What to look for? What are the signs that might be worrying?
So I think when it comes to signs among friends or family, looking online is one component, but also looking at your relationship is probably the more important one. And like often there's online components to that relationship as well as offline components to that relationship. But what we're kind of repeatedly seeing is that people who are being radicalized are cutting off more of their kind of original relationships. So part of a radicalization process is often being more and more secluded, but also more and more drawn into kind of a replacement community. If your friend or your child or something like that, or like suddenly becoming more and more withdrawn, but also more and more pulled into a new friend group, that might be at least worth understanding what that new group is about. And if there's signs of radicalization there's often things like helplines where you might be able to reach out to local organizers, local facilitators of different sorts. Some of them are like ran by independent nonprofits and do not have ties to law enforcement. Some of them have ties to law enforcement, etc. So like understand the nature of that. But there's often support you can get either from like public services or from like nonprofits, etc. in your area to deal with that.